Jonas Hartwell had been hauling cargo between frontier colonies for 6 months without meaningful human conversation, so when he docked at Nexus Station and heard actual voices arguing in the loading bay, he found himself gravitating toward the commotion like a moth toward flame. What he found was 3 Corvan traders standing around what appeared to be a large shipping sack, engaged in the kind of heated discussion that usually meant someone was about to lose money. 3 credits, final offer, the lead Corvan was saying to a prospective buyer who looked skeptical about whatever was being sold. Damaged goods, but still functional for basic labor. Jonas edged closer, partly out of curiosity and partly because 6 months of solitude had made him desperate for any kind of social interaction, even if it involved watching alien traders haggle over questionable merchandise. The sack on the ground between them was moving slightly, which suggested its contents were alive and not particularly happy about their current circumstances. What kind of basic labor? The potential buyer asked suspiciously. Translation work, light maintenance, anything that doesn't require initiative or independent thinking, the Corvan replied with the practiced ease of someone who'd given this sales pitch before. The problem is attitude, completely refuses to cooperate with proper authority structures. And the price? Originally 20 credits, marked down to 5 because of behavioral issues, now 3 credits because we need the space and frankly, it's more trouble than it's worth. Jonas watched the sack move again, a deliberate shift that looked less like unconscious movement and more like someone trying to get comfortable in extremely uncomfortable circumstances. Something about the whole situation bothered him in ways he couldn't quite articulate. Maybe it was the casual way the traders discussed their merchandise, or maybe it was 6 months of isolation making him more sensitive to the concept of beings trapped in small spaces. What's in the sack? He heard himself asking before his better judgment could intervene. The lead Corvan looked him over with the kind of assessment that calculated profit potential based on clothing quality and equipment visible at his belt. Lyrian female, approximately 25 standard years, full telepathic capabilities when properly motivated. Minor cosmetic damage but fully functional for intended purposes. Intended purposes? Translation services, communication facilitation, basic companionship duties. The Corvan's tone suggested these were euphemisms for things Jonas probably didn't want to know about. Very useful for traders who work with multiple species, though this particular unit has proven difficult to manage. Jonas looked down at the sack again, noting that it had gone completely still in the way that suggested whoever was inside was listening very carefully to the conversation about their future. 3 credits. 3 credits, the Corvan confirmed. Cash transaction, no returns, all sales final. We take no responsibility for behavioral problems or adaptation difficulties. Jonas had 3 credits in his pocket, barely enough for a decent meal at the station's commissary, certainly not enough for anything that would significantly impact his life. But something about the situation was bothering him in ways that 6 months of solitude and too much time to think had made difficult to ignore. I'll take it, he said, surprising himself with the decision. The transaction was completed with the kind of efficient ruthlessness that suggested the Corvans were eager to be rid of their problematic merchandise. Jonas handed over his 3 credits, received a data pad with what appeared to be ownership documentation, and found himself standing in the loading bay with a moving sack and no clear idea what he was supposed to do next. Congratulations on your purchase, the lead Corvan said with obvious relief. Transport container is included in the sale price. We recommend keeping the subject secured until proper behavioral conditioning can be established. Behavioral conditioning? Standard domestication protocols for difficult specimens. The data pad includes recommended procedures, though we make no guarantees about effectiveness with this particular unit. The Corvans left with obvious haste, and Jonas found himself alone in the loading bay with his impulsive purchase. The sack had resumed moving, subtle shifts that suggested its occupant was testing the boundaries of their confinement. Well, Jonas said to the sack, feeling slightly ridiculous, I guess we should probably get you back to my ship. The movement stopped abruptly, and Jonas had the distinct impression he was being evaluated by someone he couldn't see. After a moment, the sack shifted again in what might have been a nod or might have been an attempt to find a more comfortable position. Jonas's ship was a converted cargo hauler called the Wanderer, not particularly fast, not particularly pretty, but reliable and spacious enough for his solitary lifestyle. He carried the sack to his cargo hold, then stood there trying to figure out the logistics of releasing someone who'd been described as dangerous and difficult while making sure they didn't immediately try to escape or attack him. "Okay," he said to the sack, "I'm going to open this up, but I want you to know that I'm not planning to hurt you. The Corvins said you were dangerous, but I figure anyone would be dangerous after being stuffed in a sack and sold like cargo." He carefully untied the restraints holding the sack closed, then stepped back to give its occupant room to emerge. What came out was not what he'd been expecting, despite the Corvin's description. The Lyrian woman who extracted herself from the transport container was small-boned and delicate-looking, but she moved with the kind of controlled precision that suggested significant physical capability despite her size. Her skin had a pale, luminescent quality marked with intricate silver patterns that seemed to shift slightly in the light, and her ears swept back from her head in graceful points that immediately identified her species. Her hair was white silver and tangled from confinement, and her clothes were the kind of basic utility garments that suggested she'd been stripped of any personal possessions. But it was her eyes that made Jonas take an involuntary step backward. They were large, luminous, and completely furious, the kind of anger that came from months or years of mistreatment and was looking for a target to focus on. She said something in a language Jonas didn't recognize, but her tone made her meaning perfectly clear. Then she switched to accented but understandable standard, "You. Human. What do you want with me? Honestly?" Jonas said, trying to project calm reasonableness while staying out of grabbing range. "I'm not entirely sure. I saw those traders selling you like cargo, and it seemed wrong. 3 credits seemed like a reasonable price to pay to ease my conscience." She stared at him for a long moment, her luminous eyes moving from his face to his hands to the exits of the cargo hold, clearly calculating possibilities and escape routes. "You paid 3 credits to ease your conscience. I know it doesn't sound like much of a reason, but I've been alone out here for months, and I guess isolation makes you do impulsive things. And now what? You expect gratitude? Submission? Services in exchange for your 3-credit generosity?" Jonas looked at her defensive posture, the way she held herself ready to fight or run, and realized that his impulsive purchase had put him in a position where any answer he gave would sound either threatening or patronizing. "Now I guess I figure out how to help you get wherever you want to go," he said finally. "Though I should probably mention that I don't know much about Lyrian customs or needs, so you'll have to tell me if I do something wrong." She was quiet for a long moment, studying him with the kind of intensity that made him wonder if her telepathic abilities were currently focused on reading his intentions. "You're not planning to keep me?" "Keep you? Like what, a pet?" "No, that's not. I mean, you're obviously a person, not property. The whole transaction was illegal as hell, and if you want to report those Corvins to station security, I'll back up your story. But you own me now. According to their documentation, I am your legal property until you choose to release me." Jonas looked at the data pad the Corvins had given him, which apparently contained ownership certificates and behavioral management recommendations. Legal property according to Corvin law, maybe, but human law doesn't recognize slavery, and this is my ship operating under human jurisdiction. As far as I'm concerned, you're a free person who happens to be hitching a ride. She tilted her head, her pointed ears rotating slightly as if focusing on sounds he couldn't hear. "You're telling the truth," she said with obvious surprise. "Was there some question about that? Most beings lie when they're trying to manipulate others into compliance. Your thoughts are unusually transparent." Jonas realized she'd been reading his mind, which explained her gradual shift from defensive anger to cautious curiosity. "Does that hurt? The telepathy, I mean. Not unless I encounter hostile thoughts or deliberate deception." She moved slightly closer, though still maintaining careful distance. "Your mind is quite loud, actually. Very lonely, somewhat guilty about the impulsive purchase, genuinely concerned about my welfare, and completely uncertain about what to do next." "That's embarrassingly accurate." For the first time since emerging from the sack, she almost smiled. I am Zira Velnash, formerly of the Lyrian Diplomatic Corps, currently without status or destination. Jonas Hartwell, cargo hauler and apparently very bad at making rational purchasing decisions. He gestured around his ship's hold. So, Zira Velnash, where would you like to go? She was quiet for a long moment, looking around the cargo hold that was larger and cleaner than anything she'd seen in months. I don't know, she said finally. I've been captive for so long that I'd forgotten there were choices to make. Well, Jonas said, you've got time to figure it out. This ship isn't fast, but it's comfortable, and I could use the company if you don't mind traveling with someone who talks to his navigation computer like it's a person. You talk to your computer. 6 months of solitude will make you have conversations with anything that responds, even if it's just automated acknowledgments. Zira looked around the cargo hold again, then at Jonas, her telepathic assessment apparently continuing. Your offer of transportation is genuine. Your loneliness is considerable. And your intentions toward me are protective rather than exploitative. I try to be decent when possible. Decency, she said thoughtfully, is not a common quality among those who frequent slave markets. I wasn't frequenting the slave market. I was just curious about the argument, and then I got angry about the way they were treating you. 3 credits angry. 3 credits was all the cash I had on me. If I'd had more, I probably would have paid more. She studied him for another long moment, then made what appeared to be a decision. Very well, Jonas Hartwell. I will accept your offer of transportation, at least until I determine what options are available to me. Great. I should probably show you where the crew quarters are, and we should probably get you some proper clothes and food. You look like you haven't had a decent meal in months. I haven't had a decent meal in months, she confirmed matter-of-factly. As Jonas led her toward the crew quarters, he reflected on the fact that his 3-credit impulse purchase had just complicated his life in ways he couldn't predict. But for the first time in 6 months, his ship didn't feel quite so empty, and that seemed worth whatever challenges lay ahead. Even if he had no idea what those challenges might be. Jonas discovered that providing hospitality to a telepathic former captive was significantly more complicated than he'd anticipated when Zira's attempts to sleep in the guest quarters resulted in what sounded like furniture being systematically destroyed. He found her the next morning barricaded behind an overturned table, wide awake and clearly having spent the night in a state of hypervigilant defensive readiness. Bad night, he asked carefully, staying in the doorway rather than entering what she'd obviously claimed as secure territory. The room has no defensible positions, she explained matter-of-factly. Too many entry points, inadequate sight lines, and the door mechanism operates from the outside rather than being controlled from within. Jonas looked at the quarters he'd proudly considered comfortable and private, trying to see them through the eyes of someone who'd spent months as a captive. Right. I guess I didn't think about security from that perspective. Also, your ship's computer speaks to me. Speaks to you. Computer doesn't usually initiate conversations. It doesn't speak in words. It speaks in electronic presence. Constant background noise that makes mental silence impossible. She rubbed her temples with the gesture of someone dealing with a persistent headache. Lyrian telepathy is not selective. We perceive all conscious activity within our range, including artificial intelligence. Jonas realized that his well-intentioned offer of comfortable quarters had inadvertently created a situation where Zira was being bombarded by involuntary telepathic contact with every system on his ship. That sounds awful. Is there anything we can do to reduce the interference? Distance helps. Shielding helps more, though most ships aren't designed with telepathic considerations in mind. What about the cargo hold? It's further from the main computer systems, and I could set up some kind of privacy screen. Zira looked genuinely surprised by the suggestion. You would allow me to occupy cargo space? It's not about allowing you to do anything. It's about finding a setup where you can actually get some rest. Jonas gestured toward the overturned furniture. This obviously isn't working. But cargo holds are for possessions, not people. Zira, you're not cargo. You're a person who needs a comfortable place to sleep that doesn't cause telepathic headaches. If that happens to be the cargo hold, then the cargo hold becomes a bedroom. She studied him with that intense telepathic focus he was learning to recognize. Your thoughts about this are genuine. You truly don't consider me property. Of course I don't consider you property. The fact that I technically have ownership papers doesn't make you any less of a person. Most beings would not make that distinction. Jonas helped her relocate to a sectioned-off area of the cargo hold, installing privacy screens and basic furniture with the kind of collaborative effort that gradually established their working relationship. Zira's telepathic abilities made her remarkably good at anticipating what tools he'd need next, while her insights into the ship's systems helped him identify inefficiencies he'd never noticed. Your navigation computer is confused about the route to Kepler Station, she mentioned while helping him adjust the privacy screens. Confused how? It's calculating 3 different optimal paths simultaneously without being able to choose between them. The conflict is creating computational stress that manifests as electronic anxiety. Jonas paused in his work to look at her. My computer is anxious. Artificial intelligences develop personality characteristics based on their programming conflicts and usage patterns. Yours has become indecisive due to conflicting optimization algorithms. Can you communicate with it? Help resolve the conflict? Possibly. Lyrian telepathy can interface with sufficiently complex AI systems, though the experience is unusual for both parties. What followed was one of the strangest conversations Jonas had ever witnessed, consisting entirely of Zira sitting quietly with her eyes closed while his navigation computer's displays cycled through increasingly complex patterns. After several minutes, both the computer and Zira seemed to reach some kind of resolution. Better? Jonas asked. Much better, Zira confirmed. Your navigation system now has clear route prioritization protocols and significantly reduced background processing anxiety. And how do you feel? Like I've just had a very interesting discussion with an artificial mind that thinks in 3-dimensional probability matrices. She smiled genuinely for the first time since he'd met her. It was quite refreshing, actually. Your computer's thoughts are much more organized than most organic minds. Over the following days, their partnership evolved from cautious cooperation to something approaching genuine friendship. Zira's telepathic insights proved invaluable for Jonas's cargo business, allowing him to read the intentions and reliability of potential clients in ways that dramatically improved his negotiation outcomes. The Centaurian trader at Docking Bay 7 is planning to default on payment, she mentioned casually while Jonas was reviewing cargo contracts. How do you know? His surface thoughts are focused on immediate profit, but his deeper intentions involve leaving the station before payment becomes due. Also, he's been calculating whether your cargo is valuable enough to steal rather than purchase. Wonderful. What about the Altarian delegation at Docking Bay 12? Honest but desperate. They're willing to pay premium rates for discreet transport because they're fleeing political persecution on their homeworld. Jonas cancelled the contract with the Centaurian and accepted the Altarian job at rates that were fair but profitable. This telepathic business insight is incredibly useful, he said. I could get used to making decisions based on actual information rather than guesswork. I could get used to using my abilities to help rather than simply survive, Zira replied. The Corvins considered telepathy useful only for detecting deception and extracting information. What was it like, being captive for so long? Zira was quiet for a moment, her expression becoming distant in the way that suggested she was accessing difficult memories. Constant violation. Telepaths can't simply turn off our abilities, so I was forced to experience the thoughts and intentions of beings who considered me property. The psychological invasion was extensive. I'm sorry that happened to you. Are you? Or are you simply expressing social courtesy because you believe sympathy is expected? Jonas realized she'd been reading his mind during their conversation, assessing the sincerity of his emotional responses. I'm genuinely sorry. The idea of being trapped in someone else's thoughts for months, especially hostile thoughts, sounds like psychological torture. It was psychological torture, she confirmed matter-of-factly. But it's over now, and dwelling on past trauma serves no productive purpose. Recovery isn't quite that simple, though, is it? Zira looked at him with surprise. What makes you say that? You still barricade yourself in your quarters every night. You test every new person we meet for hostile intentions before you'll interact with them. And you haven't asked me about returning you to Lyrian space, which suggests you're not ready to trust your own people's ability to protect you. Your observational skills are more sophisticated than I expected. 6 months of solitude gave me a lot of time to think about trauma and recovery. I may not have been held captive, but isolation has its own psychological effects. Is that why you bought me? To address your own trauma? Jonas considered the question seriously. Maybe partly. But mostly I think I recognized someone who needed help, and helping felt better than just walking away. Even though helping cost you 3 credits you could barely afford. 3 credits was a bargain for the chance to do something decent. That evening, as they settled into their respective quarters, Zira paused at the entrance to her sectioned-off area of the cargo hold. Jonas, she said quietly, thank you. For what? For treating me like a person rather than a 3-credit purchase. For giving me space to heal rather than demanding gratitude. And for showing me that not all beings who offer help have ulterior motives. You don't need to thank me for basic decency. Actually, I do. Because basic decency has been rare enough in my recent experience that I'd forgotten what it looked like. As Jonas settled into his own quarters, he reflected on how much his life had changed in just a few days. His ship felt less empty, his work felt more purposeful, and for the first time in months, he was looking forward to tomorrow's conversations rather than just enduring another day of solitude. He was also beginning to realize that his feelings towards Zira were becoming more complicated than simple compassion for someone he'd helped. But given their respective backgrounds and the unusual circumstances of their meeting, he figured those complications could wait until they'd both had more time to adjust to their partnership. After all, some things were worth taking slowly, even when you'd already made the initial investment for 3 credits. 3 months into their partnership, Jonas and Zira had developed the kind of comfortable working relationship that made his former solitary lifestyle seem almost unbearable in retrospect. Her telepathic insights had improved his cargo business dramatically, while his patient approach to her recovery had helped her regain confidence in her own judgment and abilities. Which was why he was particularly disturbed to find her in a state of violent agitation when he returned from a supply run at Frontier Station. "We need to leave," she said without preamble, her telepathic abilities clearly active and focused on something that was causing her significant distress. Now. Before they finish docking. Who's finishing docking? Corvin slave traders. The same ones who sold me to you. Her luminescent silver markings were fluctuating rapidly, indicating extreme emotional distress. They have other captives, Jonas. I can feel their terror and desperation from here. Jonas looked out the viewport at the ship docking 2 berths away, a converted cargo hauler not unlike his own, but with the kind of reinforced security modifications that suggested its owners transported things that might try to escape. How many captives? At least 6. Maybe more. Different species, all experiencing psychological trauma consistent with extended captivity. Zira moved restlessly around the cargo hold, her agitation increasing as the slave ship completed its docking procedures. We should leave before they recognize me or realize you're the human who purchased their damaged goods. Or, Jonas said slowly, we could do something about it. Zira stopped moving and stared at him. Do something about it how? I don't know yet. But we can't just leave knowing there are people being held captive right across the docking bay. Jonas, these are the same traders who held me for months. They're experienced, well-armed, and completely ruthless. What could the 2 of us possibly do against professional slavers? We have advantages they don't know about. Your telepathic abilities give us intelligence about their intentions and security measures. My cargo credentials give us legitimate reasons to be in the area. And they think you're safely enslaved somewhere, so they're not expecting interference from their former merchandise. Zero looked at him with the expression of someone trying to determine whether he was brave or simply insane. You want to rescue their current captives. I want to try. With your help, if you're willing. Without it, if necessary, though I admit the chances of success would be significantly lower. Why? She asked with genuine curiosity. These aren't your people. You have no personal connection to their suffering. Why would you risk everything to help strangers? Jonas considered the question, trying to articulate feelings that had been building since he'd first seen Zira emerge from that transport sack. Because 3 months ago, I paid 3 credits to ease my conscience about one person's suffering, and it turned out to be the best decision I ever made. Maybe helping more people would be worth more than 3 credits. It could also get us both killed. It could, Jonas agreed. But so could running cargo to frontier colonies, and we do that every day. Zira was quiet for a long moment, her telepathic focus apparently directed toward the slave ship across the docking bay. There are 7 captives, she said finally. 2 Altarians, 3 humans, 1 Zephyrian, and someone I can't identify, possibly a species I haven't encountered before. They're being held in converted cargo containers with minimal life support. Security measures. 4 guards, rotating shifts. Basic energy weapons, but nothing that couldn't be overcome with proper planning and coordination. The ship's AI is rudimentary, nowhere near sophisticated enough to resist telepathic interference. Are you saying you can disable their computer systems? I'm saying I can convince their computer systems to experience selective malfunctions at convenient moments. She moved closer to the viewport, studying the slave ship with professional assessment. Jonas, if we do this, it won't be a simple rescue operation. Those traders will come after us, and they'll bring friends. Then we make sure they can't come after anyone ever again. That's not rescue, that's warfare. Sometimes, Jonas said with a conviction that surprised him, warfare is the appropriate response to people who make their living buying and selling other people. Zira studied him with her telepathic abilities fully focused, apparently reading not just his surface thoughts but his deeper motivations and emotional commitments. You've changed, she observed. How so? 3 months ago, you were a lonely cargo hauler who made impulsive decisions based on momentary guilt. Now you're someone who's willing to fight professional slavers to protect strangers. That's not the same person. Maybe not, Jonas admitted. Maybe knowing you, learning about what you went through, made me realize that decent people have responsibilities beyond just minding their own business. And if this rescue attempt fails? If we end up dead or captured ourselves? Then at least we tried to do something meaningful instead of just running away. Zira was quiet for another long moment, then smiled with what looked like a mixture of affection and exasperation. Your thoughts about this are absolutely transparent, and absolutely determined. You're going to attempt this rescue with or without my help. I'd rather do it with your help. Of course you would. My telepathic abilities make success significantly more likely. She moved away from the viewport and began checking their ship's defensive systems with practiced efficiency. Very well, Jonas Hartwell. Let's see if we can turn your 3-credit investment into a full-scale liberation operation. The plan they developed was both simple and audacious. Zira would use her telepathic abilities to disable the slave ship security systems and create distractions, while Jonas posed as a potential buyer to get close enough to free the captives. The key was timing, everything had to happen simultaneously to prevent the slavers from responding effectively. Remember, Zira said as they prepared to implement their plan, once we start this, there's no going back. Those traders will consider us enemies permanently. Good, Jonas replied. I'd rather be their enemy than their customer. The execution went smoother than either of them had dared to hope. Zira's telepathic interference caused exactly the right systems failures at exactly the right moments, while Jonas's performance as a disinterested cargo hauler investigating available merchandise got him access to the captive holding areas. Within 30 minutes, they had 7 freed beings aboard their ship and the slave ship's crew unconscious from what appeared to be a catastrophic life support malfunction. Will they survive? Jonas asked as they prepared to leave Frontier Station. They'll recover, Zira said with satisfaction. Though they'll have splitting headaches for several days and some interesting memory gaps about recent events. And the ship? Completely disabled. They'll need major repairs before it's spaceworthy again, assuming they can figure out what went wrong with their systems. As they departed the station with their unexpected passengers, Jonas realized that his quiet cargo hauling business had just become something entirely different. 7 rescued beings of various species, all traumatized by captivity and uncertain about their futures, were now depending on him and Zira for safety and guidance. So what now? He asked as they reached safe distance from Frontier Station. Now we find places for our passengers to start new lives, Zira said matter-of-factly. Some may want to return to their homeworlds, others may prefer to start fresh somewhere else. Either way, we help them make their own choices about their futures. And after that? After that, we continue doing cargo runs, except now we also watch for other opportunities to interfere with slave trading operations. She smiled at him with obvious affection. Congratulations, Jonas. Your 3-credit purchase has evolved into a personal war against slavery. Jonas looked around his ship's common area, which was now filled with rescued beings sharing food and beginning to process their freedom, and realized that his solitary lifestyle was officially over. But instead of feeling overwhelmed by the responsibility, he felt more purposeful than he had in years. Could be worse ways to spend my time, he said. Could be, Zira agreed. Though I should probably mention that one of our passengers is a Zephyrian engineer who specializes in ship modifications, and another is a human who used to work in security consulting. If we're going to make a habit of this, we might want to consider upgrading our capabilities. Jonas looked at her with growing realization. You're talking about building a team. I'm talking about building a family, she corrected. A family that happens to specialize in liberating people from situations they didn't choose for themselves. As the Wanderer headed toward open space with its cargo of newly free beings, Jonas reflected on how dramatically his life had changed since that impulsive 3-credit purchase. He was no longer a lonely cargo hauler avoiding meaningful human contact, he was part of something larger and more important than anything he'd imagined possible. And looking at Zira, who was already making plans for their next rescue operation, he realized that his feelings for her had evolved far beyond gratitude or simple companionship into something that felt like love, built on shared purpose and mutual respect. 3 credits, he thought, had turned out to be the bargain of a lifetime. 2 years after Jonas's impulsive 3-credit purchase, Haven Station occupied a strategic position in the Kepler system and served as the unofficial headquarters for what had become known throughout the frontier as the Underground Railroad, a network of ships and safe houses dedicated to disrupting slave trading operations and providing refuge for rescued beings. Jonas stood in the station's command center, watching through reinforced viewports as another group of liberated captives disembarked from their rescue ship, and tried to process how dramatically his life had changed. 17 rescued this month, Zira reported, approaching with a data pad full of logistics information and a smile that made Jonas's chest tighten with affection even after all this time. 12 have chosen to return to their homeworlds, 3 want to join our operations, and 2 are requesting asylum here on the station. And the slavers? The Corvin operation we targeted last week has been completely shut down. Their ships are impounded, their leaders are in custody, and their financial networks have been disrupted enough to prevent immediate reorganization. She paused beside him, close enough that he could feel the warmth radiating from her skin. It's been a good month. Jonas nodded, though he was primarily focused on the way Zira moved with confident purpose through their shared space, coordinating rescue operations and refugee services with the kind of natural leadership that had emerged once she'd fully recovered from her own captivity. The silver markings on her skin now glowed with contentment rather than stress, and her telepathic abilities had become the foundation of their intelligence network throughout the sector. The Altarian Council sent another commendation, she continued, settling into the chair beside his workstation with the casual intimacy that had developed over months of working closely together. They're officially recognizing Haven Station as a legitimate humanitarian organization. Does that come with funding? Substantial funding. Enough to expand our operations significantly, if we want to. Jonas considered this, looking around the command center they'd built from a converted cargo bay. 7 rescued beings now worked as permanent staff members, coordinating everything from ship maintenance to psychological counseling for traumatized refugees. What had started as his solitary cargo business had become a community dedicated to helping others build new lives free from exploitation. "What do you think?" he asked. "Are we ready to expand?" "I think," Zira said with the directness that had become one of her most endearing qualities, "that we should discuss what kind of expansion we want. Professional expansion, personal expansion, or both." Jonas looked at her, noting the way her luminous eyes held a question she hadn't quite asked directly. "Personal expansion. Jonas, we've been working together for 2 years, living together for 18 months, and sharing responsibilities that most people would consider marriage-level partnership commitments. At what point do we acknowledge that this relationship has evolved beyond professional collaboration?" He felt his heart rate increase, partly from nervousness and partly from relief that she'd finally brought up the subject they'd both been carefully not discussing. "I wasn't sure how you felt about that kind of evolution." "How I felt about it?" Zira's telepathic abilities made her expression shift to gentle amusement. "Jonas, I can read your emotions. I know you love me. The question is whether you're planning to do anything about it, or if we're going to continue pretending that shared quarters and coordinated life goals are just convenient working arrangements." "I love you too," he said, surprising himself with how easy the admission was once he'd actually made it. "I have for months. I just wasn't sure if it was appropriate, given how we met and everything you'd been through. You were worried that my feelings might be gratitude rather than genuine affection?" "Something like that." Zira moved closer, close enough that her telepathic abilities would be reading not just his surface thoughts but his deeper emotional patterns. "Jonas Hartwell, my telepathic assessment of your character began the day you opened that transport sack. You are kind, brave, stubborn about doing the right thing, and completely transparent in your emotional responses. Those qualities made me feel safe, then made me trust you, and eventually made me love you. And that's not gratitude. Gratitude was what I felt when you gave me freedom and space to heal. Love is what I feel when I watch you risk your life to help strangers, when you make terrible jokes to cheer up traumatized refugees, and when you treat every being on this station like family regardless of their species or background." Jonas realized that his 3-credit impulse purchase had led not just to freedom for Zira, but to the kind of partnership he'd never known he wanted, someone who shared his values, supported his goals, and understood him better than he understood himself. "So," he said, "personal expansion." "Personal expansion," she confirmed, and kissed him with the kind of certainty that made everything else seem obvious. 6 months later, their bonding ceremony took place in Haven Station's main assembly hall, witnessed by rescued beings from 12 different species and officiated by an Altarian diplomat who specialized in interspecies legal arrangements. Jonas wore formal clothes that had been modified to accommodate the ceremonial requirements of both human and Lyrian traditions, while Zira wore a gown that had been created by the station's residents as a collective wedding gift. "Jonas Hartwell," she said during their vows, "you paid 3 credits for my freedom and gave me back my life. In return, I offer you my love, my partnership, and my commitment to building something meaningful together." "Zira Velnash," he replied, using the pronunciation he'd finally mastered after months of practice, "you transformed my loneliness into purpose and showed me that decent people have the power to change other people's lives. In return, I offer you my love, my protection, and my promise that we'll face whatever comes next together." The celebration afterward involved food from 8 different worlds, music that incorporated traditional elements from multiple species, and toasts in languages Jonas was still learning to understand. But the moment that stayed with him was later that evening, when he and Zira stood together in their shared quarters, no longer separate spaces, but a home they'd built together, and looked out at the station they'd created. "Any regrets about your 3-credit investment?" she asked. "Only that I didn't buy you sooner," Jonas replied, then paused. "Though I suppose you weren't for sale until that particular day." "I wasn't for sale," she corrected with gentle firmness. "I was stolen property being disposed of by beings who had no right to sell me." "You didn't buy me, Jonas. You bought my freedom. Best 3 credits I ever spent. And now?" Jonas looked around at their home, filled with mementos from the beings they'd helped and pictures of the family they'd built from rescued strangers who'd chosen to stay. Haven Station housed 43 permanent residents, supported rescue operations throughout the sector, and had become known as a place where anyone could find safety and new opportunities regardless of their past circumstances. "Now we keep building," he said. "The station, the rescue network, our life together. All of it. And if we have children someday? Then we'll teach them that 3 credits can change the universe if you spend it on the right thing." 5 years after their bonding ceremony, Jonas and Zira stood in the same spot, watching their adopted daughter, a young human they'd rescued from Corvan traders, play with her adopted siblings from 4 different species. The children were arguing good-naturedly about whose turn it was to help with station maintenance, blissfully unaware that their normal childhood was built on a foundation of their parents' determination to fight against slavery and exploitation. "She's going to want to join the rescue operations when she's older," Zira observed, using her telepathic abilities to monitor their daughter's thoughts as she played. "They all are," Jonas replied, watching their mixed-species family with contentment that still surprised him sometimes. "Think we've raised them well enough to handle it? I think we've raised them to understand that freedom is something worth fighting for and that families can be built from anyone who needs love and protection." Jonas nodded, remembering the lonely cargo hauler he'd been before that day at Nexus Station when curiosity and 3 credits had changed his entire life. Haven Station now supported a network of rescue operations that stretched across 3 sectors. Their children were growing up believing that helping strangers was normal family behavior, and he woke up every morning next to someone who understood him better than he understood himself. "Best 3 credits anyone ever spent," he said, pulling Zira closer as they watched their family play. "Best investment in the universe," she agreed, and he could feel her contentment through their shared telepathic bond, a connection that had grown stronger over the years and now let them communicate without words when necessary. As the station's evening cycle began and their children reluctantly headed inside for dinner, Jonas reflected on how a single moment of conscience-driven impulse buying had led to everything meaningful in his life. The lonely man who'd bought a girl in a sack to ease his guilt had become someone who'd helped liberate hundreds of captives, built a family from rescued strangers, and created a legacy that would outlast both him and Zira. 3 credits, he thought as they headed inside to join their family for dinner, was definitely the bargain of several lifetimes.